Hi, this is a brief lecture on exotic or unusual forms of trademarks, often known as non-traditional trademarks. A beginning note on TRIPS and our international trade obligations. All WTO members must now accept marks which are combinations of colors. Each member state has the right to make registrability of colors dependent on acquired distinctiveness. And additionally, they can require that signs, and not just colors, but all signs are visually perceptible. A number of countries have interpreted their obligations to mean that you can't register a single color, or you can't register a color without an associated shape. For example, the Tiffany box for Tiffany blue. I'll mention a couple of country variations as I go. We're going to start with sounds. Sounds are the most common non-traditional trademark, but they are still not very common. There were more than 2.6 million active trademark registrations in the US in 2020. Of those, there were only about 250 sensory trademark registrations. About 234 of those are sound marks. Of those, about 36 were of familiar sounds without words accompanying the sound. So here's a couple examples. It's likely that many of you recognize those. After Qualitex, if color can never be inherently distinctive, maybe sound can't be either. The TTAB, the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board, today usually requires secondary meaning. The EU also recognizes sound marks. Japan added sound and smell fairly recently, and China also recently provided for sound marks. Though the last time I checked, China still says no to trademarks on smells, single colors, and moving images. The US does allow registration of smells. A scent of plumeria blossoms for thread and yarn got registered in 1990. The applicant had evidence that customers, dealers, and distributors recognized the scent as indicating source, perhaps in part because no one else used scent to distinguish their products in that field. The TTAB limited its holding, allowing the registration to exclude products which are noted for those features, such as perfume, cologne, or scented household products. And one thing I'll ask you to consider in class is under this rule that if the product is known for scent, then scent can't be registered. Are scented pens registrable? There are only a few registered scent marks in the US, also in the EU. The smell of fresh cut grass was registered in the EU for tennis balls, but subsequently the EU adopted a visual elaboration requirement so that people could know what it was that was registered. That was then changed, but in 2015, the EU Trademark Directive provides that in order to fulfill the objective of the registration system for trademarks, namely to ensure legal certainty and sound administration, it is essential to require that the sign is capable of being represented in a manner which is clear, precise, self-contained, easily accessible, intelligible, durable, and objective. This is arguably a much more stringent standard than visual representation, and it may well be the death knell for certainly scent marks and taste marks, given our lack of vocabulary for elaborating on them in the way required by the standard. The EU IPO, the office that is responsible for registering things, guidelines say that taste, touch, and smell marks are not registrable because the requisite technology needed to allow for a clear, precise, intelligible, and self-contained representation of such a mark is not available, although it obviously holds out the possibility of future change. In the US, taste is probably not registrable at all. The TTAB affirmed this refusal to register an orange flavor for pills. The reasoning is somewhat similar to that in the EU, that they would have difficulty, making the necessary determinations and having the necessary similarity comparison. The orange flavor is functional because it makes the drugs taste better and increases patient compliance. The applicant says, well, many flavors are available. There's no need for other people to use orange. And in class, I want to talk about whether Justice Breyer's acceptance of the very same argument in Qualitext is inconsistent with the PTO's handling of the orange taste. The TTAB also expressed concern about the difficulty of judging similarity, something Breyer also rejected when it came to color. Is the problem of differing sensory perception across different people more severe than taste than with sight? And it is quite possible that is more of a problem, in part because Westerners have less training to distinguish smells and tastes than visuals. Separately, the TTAB points out it's difficult for a taste to function as a trademark pre-purchase. Trademark function is different from functionality. A functional feature can never be a trademark. A non-functional feature might or might not perform a trademark's function. Taste is both functional and does not perform a trademark function for consumers who are trying to choose among products and services. A couple of other possibilities. Gesture marks, so marks that actually have a change over time. Consider, as you look at these gesture marks, what conduct might infringe on a mark of this nature. There are also touch marks. This is a US registration for touch mark for wine. The description of the mark is a velvet textured covering on the surface of a bottle of wine. Likewise, the surface texture of a kicking tea is registered, and there's an application for the wood-like texture of this can of sake. And the real question I have for you is, how important are these ontological boundaries? Whatever you do with the class of things that can be marks, your decisions there will actually affect the scope of the resulting rights. So in class, I want to go through the following questions with respect to the wine bottle. What type of texture on the surface of another bottle of wine might be confusingly similar? Would a touch mark for this velvet surface be confusingly similar to the word mark velvet for wine? What about to the word mark black velvet for Scotch sold in a velvet sack? So the symbol status as a mark is intimately related to questions about what the other competitors will be doing, not just to questions about what meaning is communicated to consumers. Scope and validity are always going to be pretty closely related. So thank you, and I will see you soon.